Good morning. We have a quorum at this point. It's 7:35. We'll call this meeting of the Addison County Economic Development Corp's monthly meeting for January 16th, 2025 to order. First order of business is introductions. I'm Jason LaRock and board chair.
Fred Kenny, Richard McCurr,
Mia Lines.
Nicole Bashand. I'm totally.
Rennie,
Tony Perry,
Darcy, Darcy,
Multitasking.
just introduce yourself.
Darcy Tart.
Bob O'Ryan,
Bob Wertmeyer.
Ryan,
Morning, Nicole. We're doing introductions for the recording. So you're up.
Nicole McTavish. I'm the superintendent and director of the Hannaford Career Center.
Dave, just in time, we're doing introductions for the recording.
All right, Dave Castle, Director of Operations at Mechanical Advantage.
Excellent. First order of business, are there any changes to the agenda? I'm hearing none. I'd accept a motion to accept the agenda as it is.
so moved.
It's been moved by Richard, seconded by David. Is that the
Yep.
second, Dave?
second.
Yep.
Thank you. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, raise your hand. All those opposed, motion's carried. We need to approve the October meeting minutes. Those are in your packet. Are there any, do we have a motion?
So move.
Been moved. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, Richard seconded it. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, motion's carried. Turn it over to Fred for the December activities report.
Okay, so I sent you an email in December in lieu of the meeting that had our October and November staff activity, some other information, and talked about some events that are coming up in the beginning of this year that we've been for projects that we've been involved in. Also, I then sent you an email talking about who the chairs of the various committees are and which committees our delegation sits on. Pretty impressive. We've got chairs of 4 House committees from Addison County, which is pretty unusual. I want to take a minute to officially introduce Nicole Bashand, our new office operations manager. You might have briefly met her at the annual meeting, but just want to make sure everybody meets her and knows who she is. And you all know Camille. She here is the assistant to the director. So in December, we worked on the transition a little bit. We've had to set up all the interviews. We've had some interviews with the executive committee. We have one more today. I set up a tour for legislators of 8 businesses in Addison County in December. 4 legislators made it out for that. And we also, Camille and I toured the what used to be the App Gap building on Manelli Road. That's on the market for sale. The tenants that are in there will stay in there, but he's looking to sell that building. And we also toured buildings in the town of Addison that they own, and we'll we're potentially working on an application to USDA Rural Development for the town of Addison a little later. So we toured the buildings that are involved in that potential application. I met with Mountain Max Cider and the lenders that are involved in that potential acquisition. He's wants to acquire the Happy Valley orchard and located a cidery there. So we may be making a loan for that out of our revolving loan fund, not the USDA revolving loan fund. And so working on that application, and I'll take that to the loan committee pretty soon. The audit is done. You don't have it yet, but because he's still waiting on a couple of borrower confirmations, he sends out to our borrowers and they confirm our balances and their balances, and he's waiting for a couple of those to come back, and then the audit will be completed and our 990 will be done. So you should have that in the packet for the February board meeting. Lots of work going on with our grants. Some new stuff. We put in 4 applications to the BGS Building Community Program this year. 3 of those were approved. 1 for Mountainside Flooring in Leicester, 1 for Mountain Max Cider, and 1 for Lulu Ice Cream. They're to help with their expansion. Vermont Business Magazine and Addie Indy picked up the story, picked up our news release on that. Camille wrote an application to Vermont Council on Rural Development to help with the Middlebury Thermal Energy Network work that we're doing, that you'll hear about a little more today. And we got that, so congratulations on your first grant. And that picked up some media as well. The Addison Independent and what's the Times Argus picked that up as well. They did a story on all the grants that BCRD approved for that program. Couple of upcoming events you might be interested in. Addison County Alignment and Repair, the county tire expansion that we worked on, is holding an open house on February 1st. Stonecrop Meadows, the big housing development in Middlebury, is holding a groundbreaking on February 3rd. That'll start at Town Hall Theater and then go out to the site for photo op. There was a flyer about that in your packet. And Town Hall Theater will be having opening events for their various new venues that are opening up now in February through the summer. The first one I think is coming up in early February for the new small theater that's part of their expansion. That's any questions on the activity report or the marketing communications report? All right, we'll go to citizen comments.
All right, so this is an opportunity to raise questions, concerns, community members that are not currently actively on the agenda. We don't have any other community members here other than board members, but does anyone have any comments at this point that they'd want to bring up that are not specifically on the agenda today? Okay. Take that as a no.
Okay.
So
No citizen.
let's jump to the foresight board resolutions.
Yeah, so in your packet, our bylaws and USDA rural development rules require a board resolution. They require it so that, they have proof that the board authorized us to apply. Our bylaws require a resolution to commit the assets or resources of the organization. As I mentioned, we're working with the town of Addison to help them determine the highest and best use of 3 buildings that they own on the town green: the old town hall, the town clerk's office, and the former school there. It's now called the community center. We're proposing an application to USDA Rural Development to the Rural Business Development Grant Program to conduct a study of the buildings in the land. We'd hire a consultant to do that work. So none of our funds, no ACEDC funds actually would be committed, but it would involve staff time. So that's also resources. And also because USDA is a reimbursable grant program, it does tie up funds for a short amount of time when we pay the consultant until we get reimbursed from USDA. So the resolution in your packet lays out, what the project is and includes a motion for one of you to use to make a motion to pass this resolution.
We have someone willing to make the motion.
I'd make that motion. Do you want it all read?
Or you could say as presented by staff.
Okay, then I'll make the motion as presented by staff. It's at the bottom of that sheet.
Is there a second? Richard seconds that. Is there any discussion?
Fred, could you talk a minute about kind of the probable revenue and expenses that we're going to incur in administering this grant?
Yeah, who seconded that? You get that?
Richard did.
Okay. Sure. So it'll primarily be staff time. We've put in probably 6 hours so far, meeting with the select board. Then there'll be staff time to put together the application. I'm guessing probably 4 hours total for that. And then it's just, waiting. We have to submit it by the end of February. And then the actual administration of the grant is pretty easy. We have to research and hire a consultant, but we think we have somebody that's interested, that knows the town. And then, so we have to do a MOU or a contract with that consultant. And then, then we wait till USDA makes their decisions. And if we get it, then it's just, moving the money around, getting the invoices from the consultant, checking their work and paying them and keeping track of the grant. It's up to $50,000 is the potential grant. And we would get 10% of whatever the grant is. So if they award the whole 50,000, we would get $5,000, which we've done 2 of these before. Some of you may remember the Eco Global plan that we helped work on, and then the Food Hub. And on the Food Hub, we didn't use all of our 10%. So I think we'll be the 5,000. If it's $5,000, that'll cover our time on this one.
Okay, thank you, Fred. Any other questions? Any other discussion?
And I've said this before, but I just don't think these types of things are efficient use of public resources for what we get out of it.
Noted. Did we vote yet?
We haven't voted yet.
Okay.
We're still in discussion.
Yeah.
All right, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed,
I'll be opposed.
one opposed.
That's Chris.
All right, motion's carried.
Thank you. Let you know how it goes.
Quarterly financial reports.
All right, so it's we're mid-year in the budget, and the quarterly financial report is in your packet. That includes the mid-year balance sheet and P&L. The balance sheet compares December 31 of 2024 against December 31 of 23. and the P&L compares revenue expenses to date against what we've budgeted for FY25 and brought in and spent to date. We're about $87,000 ahead of 2023 assets, but we have about $118,000 more in liabilities. This is on the balance sheet, primarily due to our new IRP loan from USDA. So that has kicked in the full amount, the full 500,000. We'll start paying against that this year. Prior to this fiscal year, we're only paying interest. You pay only interest for 3 years, and then the principal kicks in. We are about $30,000 behind projected revenue. So now I'm on the P&L. That's primarily due to a grant that we're expecting to get from ACEDC of Commerce. But we still haven't got, they've been saying for a year they're going to get us the grant agreement, and I still don't have it. But it's in the budget as we're going to receive this grant that will allow us to work on a parcel in Middlebury to move that parcel along in pre-development. And the grant will be for about $30,000, and then another $6,000 because we're going to administer. They're going to do 4 of these grants to 4 RDCs, and we're going to administer them for the 4 RDCs. So it's a total of about $36,000. So we expected to get that before now, and so that was projected to be received before the mid-year, but we haven't got it yet. So that's what the shortfall is in revenues. Everything else is pretty much in line with what we projected. We're about 15,000 below on projected expenses, which is good, but it's a little deceiving because the reason for that is that we haven't been billed by the auditor yet. I thought he was going to bill us periodically, but apparently he's going to bill us for the whole thing when he's done with it. So we projected a $15,000 expense from the auditor, and we haven't got billed yet. So that's the budget and P&L. We're in pretty good shape. I also gave you an updated version of the budget document. It's been adjusted for changes that have happened in revenue and new grants that we've been awarded, like the one that Camille applied for, and adjustments to expenses, primarily in payroll. The bottom line on that is that the deficit that we projected to be around 24,000 for the year is now down to $8,600. And that should go down more if we get this new USDA grant, because that'll bring in $5,000. So that'll bring that down to, 3,600. We still are maintaining a healthy $155,000 in reserves in our CD and our money market, and our revolving loan fund is down to about $181,000 available to lend. That's the USDA revolving loan fund. We did apply to USDA for a new IRP loan, so we're still waiting to hear on that so we can recapitalize the revolving loan fund. Don't have any USDA loans in the pipeline right now, but I do have that one potential one for Mountain Mac, but that's going to come out of our revolving loan fund, and it will pretty much use up our revolving loan fund. There's like 86,000 in our revolving loan fund, and that will use 80 if it's approved. Any questions on the financials of the budget document? Okay. I also included a document that the RDCs put together each year. Each session we send in to the legislature just an outline of what our priorities are as a group. So I included that document. There's probably no surprises in there. far as what the priorities are, housing. There are some appropriations we'd like to see, including brownfields, which isn't so much for us as some of the other RDCs, but also we'd like them to capitalize the technical assistance program that was so successful, small business technical assistance program. Other than that, CTE, we highlighted CTE funding and policy changes. Nicole, we put something in there in line with your letter to the Department of Education. I forget what all else is in there, but that'll be actually the representatives, my colleagues from a couple of the RDCs will be in House Commerce this morning at 9 o'clock. Testifying, and then the regional planning commissions will be in right after them testifying on really re-educating is what it is, educating and re-educating. Got to re-educate them every year because you've got new members. This committee is pretty new again, a lot of new people. Herb Olson, who's the new rep from Bristol. He's from Starksville, but he represents the Bristol area, is on House Commerce. So they'll be in talking about what RDCs do and who we are, and just making sure they know what our priorities are. And then there'll be other, I'm sure there'll be other, they'll ask us us being the RDCs to testify again between, now and the end of the session on probably a couple things, but we'll also be up there on the Tuesday after town meeting day. We do an annual coffee for legislators in the cafeteria. Lots of groups do that. But we'll be doing that on the Tuesday after town meeting day. All the RDCs will go and just, press the flesh with the legislators. And then we're also participating in Manufacturing Day, which is at the end of February. There'll be testimony, there'll be manufacturing demonstrations and, an expo. And there'll also be a coffee that day as well. So if anybody knows of any manufacturers that would like to display there or maybe even testify, let me know. Dave, if you guys are interested, let me know. We can get you in there on that. That's in,
Okay.
What's that?
All right, I'll talk to Dave about it.
Okay. That's in cooperation with the Vermont Chamber of Commerce. It's really their event. We're cooperating with them on it. What else do we have? We've got just some board stuff. Nicole has received all but 4 of your confidentiality and conflict of interest documents. You know who you are. Please get them back in. We need to have those each year.
It might be just 2 now.
Maybe just 2. Great.
Yeah.
Typically, we elect officers at the January board meeting, but your officers have agreed to, they serve for 2 years and they've all agreed to stay on during this transition year, which is very helpful. So thank you all very much. So they'll all stay on for this year, so we don't have to elect officers till next year. We do have 2 open seats on the board. Bill Townsend's term was up in December. So if you know of anybody or have thoughts about someone to maybe fill that seat, let me know. They do need to be a member, but we have had, occasions in the past where if you think of somebody that's appropriate, especially somebody that might bring a little more diversity to the board, we can get them to join so that they can be a board member. And then the other one is Val, who you may have heard, Val Caples, who was our rep from the town of Bristol, has retired from her position in the town. So they're waiting till they hire, I think they're waiting till they hire a new town administrator to delegate their new person to the board. It's usually their town administrator. Also, let's see, current committees that we have, ad hoc committees we have the hiring committee, an Incubator Exploratory Committee, a Merger Exploratory Committee, and our Regional Economic Development Strategy Committee. The Executive Committee discussed our committees, and decided that for now we should keep the Regional Economic Development Strategy Committee. They will get some homework soon. Camille is working with the Regional Planning Commission on developing a regional economic development strategy. It'll take the existing CEDS. You remember a CEDS as a comprehensive economic development strategy, but ours covers a really big area. It covers Chittenden, Addison, Rutland, and Central Vermont. So Adam and Camille are going to take that and narrow it down for, it'll have the same structure as the CEDS, but it would be for just Addison County. So the Reds Committee will, have work to do, looking at that work and making sure they agree with the, the objectives and the the things that the plan has, the strategy that they're laying out. And so we're going to do away with, or at least, put on the back burner the other two committees for now. Keep the hiring committee, obviously, until the hiring is finished. So those other committees will be put on hold for now. So I don't know if you remember, I could send around a note telling everybody which committee they were on if you forget. But people who are on the Reds Committee will need to stay active on that when there's work for you to do. All right, so we have one more item to cover, but we have a presentation this morning from Debbie New. Just a sec. Debbie New, who's with the Vermont Thermal Energy Network. Are you fully on, Deb? You can hear me?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay.
Good morning.
Yep. And do you plan, you're going to share your presentation?
Yeah, I'll share my
Should be
screen.
able to. Okay, hold on then that just a second. So we've been, the Vermont Thermal Energy Network has been working statewide with community groups to educate them about thermal energy and to implement some thermal energy networks in different towns. One of those is Middlebury, and the Middlebury Thermal Energy Network Working Group has been working for about a little over a year now, maybe 14 months. And ACEDC participates in that. Camille and I have been working with that group. It involves several community members, the Middlebury Energy Committee folks, and Debbie will get into that a little bit more. But and our role has been primarily to educate the businesses that we're talking to, that where we might develop a network, and to keep them, to try to get businesses involved in this. And as we mentioned earlier, we also wrote and submitted a grant to VCRD, and we'll administer that grant, and that'll be used to help advance this Middlebury Thermal Energy Network effort that Debbie's and we're involved in. So go ahead, Debbie, take it away.
Okay, thank you. I'm very glad to be talking with you this morning. All set? Okay, first of all, I want to thank Fred and Camille for inviting me. Thank you for having me. And also note that Fred and Camille and Karen before her have been really key to our efforts to help people understand thermal energy networks and understand the opportunity this presents in Addison County in particular. So just to briefly introduce myself, I grew up in Burlington. I raised my kids in Waitsfield. I currently live around the Burlington area, but I always love a chance to get into Addison County with my kayak or whatever. So I really appreciate Addison County people and communities. So what I'd like to talk about today, and let me just make sure I can share my screen. Oh, the right window. Hang on a second. So just to check, everybody can see this?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you. So what I'd like to talk about are thermal energy networks as a way to help us lower energy costs, especially for commercial and industrial properties, as well as residential, of course, but also to help us all drive sustainable economic development. So Vermont Community Thermal Networks was formed a little over 2 years ago to advance this idea in Vermont because it's taking off in other states. And I wanted to make sure we were taking full advantage of it here. So essentially what VCTN is your statewide resource, your go-to for thermal energy network information. We do a lot of education, but also facilitating community conversations and explorations of this. We also bring in the kinds of expertise we need from the regional, state, and national levels. So we are not doing this by ourselves and by any means. In fact, we have many state, regional, and local partners. You'll recognize many of these names, including your own there, ACEDC, and also your Regional Planning Commission, and in particular, 2 local energy committees from Addison County. So what I'd like to do is talk through how we introduce this concept so that you hear how we're talking about it. And then I want to tell you about what we've been doing in Middlebury and how we've been doing it and why it matters for economic development. It really is how we're leading this effort. So I would love to hear your questions if you want to collect those. I look forward to discussing this with you and learning more from you. So where we start with people is with the obvious, that here in Vermont, heat is a precious resource, and that we spend a lot of time, effort, and money trying to make heat, move it, and save as much of it as we can. And then there's cooling. We're going to need a lot more of that as our climate warms. We're starting to feel that already, and I'm not sure we're well set up for that here in Vermont. So we can have local heating and cooling that can be affordable and sustainable by using local resources and also supporting many of our local goals. And the way we do that is by using a ground source heat pump, also known as a water source heat pump. And I don't assume that everybody knows what this is, even though many people are very familiar with air source heat pumps at this point. I take a little time to explain the water or ground source heat pump as a building block of a thermal energy network. So if you have one of these in your home, it would be the gray box in the basement that you see here, and it receives temperature from water in pipes from outside the building, and it compresses that temperature, much like an air source heat pump would, into the kind of temperature you'd want in your home in the winter. In the summer, that same heat pump removes heat from the building and sends it back out through water in pipes, and that cools down the inside and keeps you comfortable year-round. So that water in pipes comes from outside the building, mainly from underground. There are other sources of heat that I'll talk about in a bit, but this is why a lot of people refer to this as geothermal energy. We're not talking about the deep down geothermal that comes up and helps Iceland heat all of their buildings effortlessly. We're not talking about that kind of hot rock geothermal or geysers coming up from under the earth. We're talking about what's just below the frost line, what's under our feet year-round in Vermont. Because essentially the sun's energy is absorbed by the earth like a big solar panel, and the earth holds on to that heat. So all the time around the year in Vermont, underground is about 50 degrees. So by drilling down to possibly about the depth of a water well and sending a big U-shaped pipe down so that water can circulate down and back up, that water will absorb the temperature of the ground and then deliver it to the heat pump in order to heat the inside of a building. So this is what they look like. On the left is a more commercial version up in the ceiling at Hula Lakeside in Burlington, if you've ever been to that facility. Or it could look very much like a boiler in a basement, that white box on the right. The other component are the pipes, which are durable plastic pipes of various diameters that go down into the ground, but can also move horizontally between buildings. It can be installed as a connection between 2 buildings at about the depth of a water or sewer line, and that way heat can be shared among buildings. So this is what we mean by a network, that a ground source heat pump is wonderful in terms of being able to be networked. It can be in a few homes like you see here, or a school, that can all be connected. And the thing about connecting, making a network, is that buildings have different thermal needs at different times. And so it can be much more efficient to share heat and create cooling among buildings and expand a network over time. We are starting small with just a few buildings, and then we are gradually expanding what could be phased in over time in order to make it more energy efficient and more cost effective. So I talked about energy or heat coming from under the ground, but there are many other sources, and I just want to highlight two here for you. This is wastewater and a bunch of the kinds of buildings that create pretty good volumes of wastewater. So think about the water that you use every day. And much of that you're warming up. And so that means that you're paying for it and then you flush it down the drain. Well, the heat that you have created and paid for can be recaptured. And it can be recaptured at the building in order to send that heat back into the building to heat more water rather than using gas or oil or propane to do it. It can also be captured at a sewer line and at the gold mine of the wastewater treatment plant, as you see on the far right. There's a lot of heat there, and that's a big deal in Middlebury, for example, and we'll talk about that a little bit. Heat can also be recovered from ventilation systems, because when you need to cool something down inside, you have to remove heat. So any kind of refrigeration, like at a supermarket or an ice arena, will mean that there is heat being rejected a lot, possibly 24/7, like from a supermarket. It can also be rejected from large buildings that have to cool certain parts of the building, or from industrial buildings that are using a fair amount of cooling. So this is what it might look like in a Vermont town. You can see under the village green is the geothermal bore field, where all the drilling has been done in one place, and then it's been covered back over and you don't even know it's there, but it's supplying moderate constant temperature to the network all the time. Then you can see that the supermarket on the left is contributing waste heat from its ventilation system. This is a conceptual diagram. This is not how it actually works. But then also the buildings that are connected are also having the heat from their wastewater recovered and fed into the system. I also want to mention that solar can be a source of thermal energy, because if you put some coils with water in them, or some kind of fluid like a propylene glycol mixed in to keep it from freezing, those can absorb heat from a solar panel and help the panels function more efficiently. So you can get more electricity, and you can also get heat from a solar panel that can be fed into the network. So just to review, thermal energy networks use ground or water source heat pumps and underground pipes to connect multiple buildings to provide heating and cooling, but also hot water and thermal storage. Because of what I mentioned, those bore fields are holding heat all the time and able to supply heat year round. So these networks also use heat that exists across our community right now. In many cases has already been paid for and would otherwise be discarded, and is being discarded. But it can be shared efficiently. And this is a key point that we dwell on for a bit with people, so they understand the opportunity for energy and cost savings. So this diagram, this part of a diagram, shows an air source heat pump needing to draw from the outside air. And at certain times of year, the outside air is much different from what we want to experience inside. So that means an air source heat pump has to work a lot harder and use more electricity. Now, I want to make sure people hear me saying that they do work. I have heat pumps in my home, and I have been very comfortable this winter, so they can work to provide comfortable temperatures inside, even at 0 degrees, 90 degrees. However, a ground or water source heat pump is drawing from much more moderate temperatures, as I've said, like about 50 degrees year round in Vermont underground. And if there's heat coming from waste water or waste heat that's been recovered, it's often arriving here at about 70 degrees, which is pretty much what we want to have inside. So a ground or water source heat pump doesn't have to work as hard and doesn't use nearly the electricity at these coldest and warmest or peak times. So that's a big part of where the savings come from and the advantage to all of us. So there are many benefits of these systems, and you can see a long list on the right-hand side. I just want to highlight 4 of these for you. These systems are resilient. In other words, the components are underground or inside, and they're much more resistant to outside disruptions and extreme weather events, as we see in Vermont here with flooding, for one. Also, they can be accessible because they're a neighborhood scale solution. So these are a neighborhood scale solution. In other words, we're not going one building at a time and expecting each building owner to be able to install and afford an energy system that's going to be more efficient and more cost effective and renewable to help us meet our climate and energy goals. But this is a system that can be shared infrastructure, and I'll talk more about that in a little bit, that can be afforded collectively in a variety of ways, meaning that people only need to connect to it, and we can make it available across a community rather than expecting people to do it all by themselves. This is also local energy. As I've described, it comes from the ground and the buildings right around us, right here. So we're not importing fuels. We're not depending on global markets or political fluctuations in terms of how much we're paying for our energy and how we access our energy. It's coming from right here, and we can have a local energy system. It can also be part of a just transition because the people who work on the gas system or the people who deliver oil and propane or run those companies, those workers are essentially plumbers and pipe fitters. And those are the skills that are needed to install and maintain these systems. So there is very little training required for them to move into these jobs and these businesses. So I want to focus on the benefits of thermal energy networks that start with energy savings and then flow into cost savings. So as I said, with no fossil fuels, you have cost stability. We can have predictable monthly bills. In fact, it can be a fixed fee every month that people pay, rather than having to afford oil and propane in the winter when it can be unaffordable for many Vermonters. I used to have oil in my home. I know, and perhaps you do as well. As I've said, there are also high efficiency systems, which means the operational and maintenance costs are much lower and the equipment lasts much longer. A ground source heat pump could last 35 years and the pipes underground can last 100 years or more. And as I've said, with less electric use, there's less demand on the electric grid. So that means energy bill savings for all of us because we don't have to pay to build out the electric grid to do everything and electrify everything for us. We have another source of thermal energy right here that can mean we can use a lot less electricity. So I just want to take a pause here in talking about the benefits to talk about this thermal energy networks as shared infrastructure. And as I've described, it's water and pipes. So it's a lot like a water or wastewater system. In fact, it's a lot easier to maintain it because you don't have to treat the water. It's a closed loop. So once you put the water in it, it stays and it just circulates. So you don't have to treat it like potable water or like wastewater. So it's even easier to manage than those systems, which our municipalities already do. So with shared infrastructure, we already have many ways to manage the upfront costs. And when you're installing pipes and heat pumps, people always want to know about the upfront costs of these systems because we know we'll pay less over time. But how do we get there? Well, there are many pathways to do this, to develop this kind of system and pay for it. And one way is to contract with a third party that knows how to develop, finance, construct, and operate these systems, which means that we as customers don't have to shoulder the upfront costs. We may pay a reasonable one-time connection fee, and then over time, we're going to be paying our fixed monthly bills, which allows the third party to recover their investment over time. So this is one of the models we're looking at, essentially a utility model, but more of a municipal utility model. So from those energy and cost savings flow many community benefits. And number one that we're hearing from Vermont communities of what they want to get out of installing a thermal energy network is the ability to do economic development in a sustainable way locally. Downtown revitalization is also top of the list, and of course that relates directly to economic development. But this is a list of the 5 top reasons we're hearing from Vermonters about what problems they're trying to solve locally that a thermal energy network might contribute to. So affordable housing can be affordable to construct and affordable to live in, because if a housing developer can connect to a network, that means they don't have to include all of the HVAC costs in their project. It can be part of the construction of the network. So it can make it much more doable to create new housing and affordable housing. And I've already mentioned resilience and quality jobs as key features of a thermal energy network and what they can bring. So this kind of system is working in Vermont and not too far away. At Champlain College in Burlington, they have a system that has been operating since 2008. And the great thing about it is it shows that you can have new construction and retrofits on the system. So they have beautiful historic homes that are offices and dorms that they have connected to the system. And every time they look at a new building or contemplate building something new, they're always thinking about how it can connect to the system. So they intend to expand this across their campus. Now, that's a campus and a single owner. So that, in a sense, is easier. This is an example of a municipal system that has been operating since 2012, and it's not in Vermont, as you can tell from the flat land behind this building in the center of the picture. It's in Iowa, but it's comparable to Vermont in that it's a small town, and like a Middlebury or Vergennes, it's kind of a county seat. It's an area that attracts people around this rural area. So they have this courthouse they decided to put on a geothermal system. The businesses around it said, well, we can't afford to do that on our own. Can we connect? Can you send us a pipe? And the engineer said, sure, it works. And the municipality said, if we own it, we can do a whole lot more with this. So they did a bunch of streetscape renovations and other things to their downtown as part of a revitalization project. So the businesses that connected to the system, and the geothermal bore field is under that green grass in front of the courthouse. Can't see it, but it's there. And it's providing heating and cooling to all the businesses around. They all formed an LLC and they manage the system. They operate it. Anyone who benefits from it is a member. The municipality owns it, which is a key feature because in Vermont, we now have a law that allows any municipality to own and operate one of these systems. So in Vermont, we have a green light to do what happened in West Union, Iowa. So this is a map of Vermont that really surprised me. It was created by an energy planner at Addison County RPC. So it comes from Addison County, but it looks at Vermont and it takes all of the designated town centers, intentional growth areas, and commercial and industrial parks. And that's what you see in gray. And when I saw this, I realized that there are many more areas in Vermont than I realized that have the density and the proximity between buildings, as well as likely the thermal energy resources that we would need in order to create a thermal energy network. This doesn't mean it's going to happen in all of these places, but we already have a lot of heat and we have much more density than we might realize. And there's more and more density coming as we have to add more housing and as we expand our economy in Vermont. But let's talk about Addison County. So right now we are working in Middlebury. We're doing some exploring in Bristol, and it would be great also to talk about Vergennes. It's clear that there are other smaller towns in Addison County that could connect buildings and share heating and cooling with one of these networks. We're just not looking at them right now, but would be very happy to have that conversation. So this brings us to what we're doing in Middlebury. And I'm really excited to share this with you. In April of last year, we held a community workshop. And at that workshop, we started by helping people see heat differently. and finding where they already have a lot of heat that could be repurposed. You can see the people in the right, they're all looking at big maps of Middlebury and looking for the kinds of buildings and facilities that are rejecting heat or where we could drill a geothermal bore field. So we discussed problems that they're trying to solve, projects that they're planning, and how a thermal energy network could fit in and also support their goals. For example, Middlebury needs to upgrade its wastewater treatment plant in the next 5 years or less. And that is a big opportunity to harvest heat from the wastewater treatment plant. And anytime you're digging something up, it makes sense to lay pipe in order to share heat as well. So the conversation here was less about the technology and more focused on working with people in the community to find buildable projects. And 3 areas emerged, and I'll talk you through those in a minute. But from this workshop, we did a fair amount of outreach between April and this past October. We connected one-to-one with property owners to learn about their buildings and get specific about how they could benefit from connecting to a network. In other words, what's in it for you was the conversation. We gathered information on their heating and cooling, their existing equipment, their energy bills, and what might work in each building or business. Then we did a high-level assessment with our experts on the energy savings that they might be able to see and what would need to happen inside the building to connect. When we gathered enough interested parties, and we did in each of these 3 areas, we held a neighborhood meeting, and those happened in October. And we further defined what a thermal energy network might look like, moving toward an actual project. And we discussed also workable ownership models and related financing opportunities. In other words, the who and the how. Who's going to help make it happen? Who's going to own it? And how we could finance it and get it going. We also identified gaps to fill, and that's the work that we're doing right now. So, of the 3 areas, one of the most municipal ones is the library block. And you can see here, number 1 is the Ilsley Public Library, which is putting in a geothermal system. You may have seen the Addison Independent had a story about the drilling for test boreholes that has happened in the parking lot behind the library. And it turns out they have pretty good flow, which means they have possibly, likely more than they need. So the town hall at number 2 has an air source heat pump ducted system. That means that they're just using electricity. So at peak times, they're paying quite a bit for electricity to heat or cool that building. If we could lay a pipe in that small space between the library and the town hall could could connect to, or I guess you'd say more turn on the geothermal system at those peak times of year. Not all year round, but just when they need it in order not to pay as much for electricity. They could engage the geothermal system from next door from the library, and the town could save money. Also, if we had the opportunity, we could connect this network to the theater and several restaurants nearby. Those would all be having waste heat, waste water that could be connected to the network and add to the heat that we already have right there. So that is one thing we're looking at with the infrastructure committee and others in town. Another interesting one is at Exchange Street. And this is where I mentioned the wastewater treatment plant, which is at the upper left-hand corner above number 1. That's the wastewater treatment plant. And the engineers for that redesign are already working, and we will be meeting with them to talk about heat recovery. Right now, that wastewater treatment plant, they're doing a great job with the resources they have, but much of the time, the water that they're sending into the river is about 70 degrees. So there is a lot of heat there, and they're going to be using more heat in order to dry the waste because it needs to be dried in order to be dealt with. Number 1 here is the new biodigester that has been operational for a couple of months. Purpose Energy installed it, and they have more heat than they know what to do with, and they're eager to sell heat into the system. So here we have the municipality and this business as potential producers, as real producers of heat and wanting to sell heat into a network that could benefit a bunch of businesses around. We've talked with Maple Landmark Woodcraft and the Hannaford Career Center. I realize you're in the room today, about their being able to be customers for this heat, for this lower cost, constant source of heat. And you can see from this list, there are other businesses in this industrial park that would be having wastewater, waste heat that could be part of the system. So this is a really interesting area. It's growing. Whistle Pig is thinking of they're moving their distilling operations here. That's even more heat. This is a really exciting potential. And finally, Washington Street in Middlebury. So you can see above Washington Street, the lower numbers, we've essentially got the Middlebury Inn, the Co-op, and the Bagel Deli there as businesses that produce excess heat. And then Peter Co Village, the affordable housing that could use heat. So we're investigating that. And then on the other side of Washington Street, number 5 is the Vermont Federal Credit Union. They have equipment that could easily connect, and they would love to connect to a network. So they're just sitting there waiting. There's also Shaw's, which would have excess heat. And number 8, the Addison County Courthouse has to replace their boiler soon. And they are looking at a geothermal system. If they go with geothermal, number 9, the sports center, the ice arena there, could contribute some heat to the system and lower their drilling costs, because drilling a geothermal bore field is the bulk of the expense of a project like this. So if heat and cooling could be shared among these buildings, then it could be beneficial to everyone in that part. And of course, you can see 7 and 10 are housing developments. They could connect, and possibly at some point, we could send a pipe under Washington Street and connect those 2 nodes. And you'll notice that the school down below number 9 is not that far away. So that could be part of a system as well. So we're looking at where could we start and what could be phased in over time.
Deb?
Yeah.
I want to give you a time check. It's getting close to the time to take questions. So
Great. Okay, good. So this is my second to last slide. I want to just share with you that people are really excited about how thermal energy networks can strengthen their communities, because it's a solution that aligns with what we already know is critical for effective change, that we're making smart use of the resources we already have and addressing multiple needs at once. So I've talked about how we can lower energy costs and how these systems are local. In other words, we can invest energy dollars locally, and we can align the decarbonization we need to do with change that's already happening, with infill housing, new housing, expanding our industrial and commercial parks. We can support existing local businesses by making our towns places that they want to and can stay, where they can attract and retain workers, by helping people access clean, affordable heating and cooling. We can also attract new businesses by having these systems that they can arrive and connect to as well. So in conclusion, when we make neighborhood scale decarbonization a common activity among our towns and cities, we could prove that the energy transition doesn't have to require sacrifice, but can create equitable long-term prosperity. So that's what we're going for. And I really look forward to hearing your questions and your observations.
thank you. Any questions or comments? Great presentation. Darcy.
I just have one quick question. Again, first of all, thank you for this information. Very enlightening. Appreciate it. You mentioned the borehole drilling being, I think you said probably the most expensive or biggest, maybe barrier to entry potentially. I don't know, but are there other things that I guess knowing about this now and a little bit more about it, I guess what are maybe other barriers to entry to getting this more online and more known?
Well, there's the technology of what's inside the buildings already and the extent of the retrofit. So I would say a barrier that is not that is possible to overcome, but would be more expensive, would be any system that operates on steam, because that is the hardest to convert to this more low temperature system. So that is one in terms of technology. Also, I would say it is the financing, and it is helping municipalities understand that this is very much like what they're already doing. But as we all know, our municipalities are stretched right now. They don't have the capacity in terms of staff, expertise, or the financial capacity to be able to take on a really big project. So we're looking at what big projects they're doing already and how this could fit in and potentially lower costs by digging once, for example. But we do need more support from the state, and what that translates into is not taxpayer dollars, but a way to form some kind of statewide, or maybe start with a regional entity that could support our towns in doing this project to help them with the development of it, not expect towns to do this on their own. They really do need people to be able to come in and provide them the resources, information, and work with them to do this, and probably take on a good bit of the load of the development of a thermal energy network by this state entity that we're talking about forming, possibly as a nonprofit, not necessarily as funded by the state, but as a central place towns can go to get the help they need.
Thank you.
I have more of a, I don't know whether it's a question or a comment, but
That's fine.
I think that elderly services in Middlebury off of
Mhm.
Exchange Street, I think they are putting in a geothermal system, I think.
Yes, you're correct.
And are you involved with that?
I am not, but some people in our working group have talked with them about it. They were able to get grants and do that project on their own for their own facility. So it's possible if a network were developed nearby, they could connect and potentially lower their costs by being part of a network rather than being a system all on its own. But it's great that they're doing this. And it is happening. There's been drilling, and I think it's moving toward completion. I hope soon.
Mhm.
Well, I have a question for you all. I believe I read, possibly in your newsletter, that you are working on forming an economic development district and working on a comprehensive economic development strategy. And this is not a question that needs to be answered right now, but I wonder if there's a place in there for looking at how thermal energy networks could contribute to that, how it could have a place in that planning and strategizing. So I just wanted to
Yes,
plant that seed.
the comprehensive economic development strategy is already written. And I
Okay.
believe, I can't remember if we included thermal in there or not, but I can check.
Okay.
But yeah, we've applied, once you have a strategy in place, you can apply to the EDA and get designated as an economic development district. And we have applied, the larger group, which is Chittenden, Addison, Rutland, and Central Vermont, have applied to EDA to become an EDD. And we're waiting to hear back if we're going to get designated or not. If we are, that'll be the opportunity for more federal funding for economic development projects, and some of it could be used for energy projects. And locally, we were just talking about this earlier today, that we're taking that larger umbrella strategy and narrowing it down for Addison County. Camille and Adam at the Planning Commission are going to work on that. The Planning Commission is also updating the regional plan. They just got a new energy planner, and they're updating the energy section of the regional plan. And I've made sure that they are going to incorporate thermal and thermal energy in the new plan.
Thank you. And we're meeting with our energy planner tomorrow to talk about thermal energy networks specifically. That's great.
Any other questions or comments? Well, thank you very much, Debbie. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. It was really great to be able to share this with you. And if you have any questions, you can funnel them to me through Fred.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
All right, Fred, back to you.
All right. I'll just add that, we've got those 3 areas in Middlebury that we're concentrating on, but there could be others. And, but it's been fun to work on. The library one is, the library was pretty far along in their development, so it's hard to kind of plug into that, but the other areas are starting new. So we're hoping to get on the ground floor with the wastewater plant because they have to redesign it anyway. So let's work on lowering their costs by sharing their wastewater, that can create energy, create heat. We had one more item to cover in the agenda. Annually, I'd give you kind of an update on member and dues churn from the previous year. So for 2024, calendar 2024, in calendar 24, we had 86 members, and we received almost $41,000 in dues. And on a fiscal basis, on fiscal year 24, we had 88 members and about 38,650 in dues. And that was about 6,000 lower than what we budgeted for dues. So we track dues both on a fiscal year and a calendar basis, because fiscal year for the budget and calendar year is when each member renews. So they renew during the calendar year. So it gets a little confusing, but when I track members, it's on a calendar year basis. So during calendar 2024, 10 members dropped their membership, and those represented about $3,700 in dues. And that was for various reasons. One retired, 2 businesses closed, unfortunately. One of them is having financial difficulties and didn't feel they could pay their dues, and they were kind of on the higher end. 2 of them, just their headquarters stopped communicating with us, despite several attempts to engage them. And 4 of them were based on, cost to value or perceived need to be a member. So various reasons they dropped their memberships. So we lost 10, but we also gained 8 new members. And those new 8 members had $2,700 in dues. So the net loss was 2 members and $1,000 in dues. Another positive development in 2024 was that 3 of our members increased their tiers. You might recall that our memberships are on tiers based on revenue. So 3 of our members went up to a higher tier because they increased their revenue. So that's really good news. So we gained another $650 in dues from them. So the net loss in dollars was only $350 in calendar 24. And just a reminder that at the retreat, we decided to increase the dues for each tier by 10% in 2025. And then by the rate of inflation in subsequent years. So all members will be receiving an email this week or early next week with that, informing them about that dues increase, thanking them for their membership, and going into why we have to increase dues, and that we haven't increased dues for many, many years. And then when their membership renews in 2025, they'll see, they'll go for the same tier probably, and maybe increase their tier, which would be great, but their tier will be 10% more in cost. So that'll increase our dues revenue by about $3,000 in fiscal year 25. So that we're implementing that right now, and it'll go into effect throughout the year because each member renews their dues at a different time during the year. Most of them are in March and April, but a lot of them happen throughout the year. Depends on when they joined. That's that last thing. we've got a little bit of time left. Any questions or concerns or things you want to share with the board?
Well, I'll just mention about the Gens partnership. I don't know whether if you're aware of it, but our executive director or former executive director, Julie Basel, retired. She likes to not say that she's actually retired, but she was with us for 6 years, actually more, but 6 years as executive director. And we just hired our new executive director who started this Monday, and her name is Christine Garrow. And she has a very good background. We hope that that she stays with us. She happens to live in Virginia. How we can find somebody with the kind of background that she has that actually lives here is amazing. But we hope that she will be able to keep the path going that Julie created, which was really a good path for the organization. So that's what's happening in Virginia.
And Renee, it's Christine Garrow. Is that what you said?
Yes, yes.
Thanks. Anybody else? I'll close the meeting.
Okay. I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So move.
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
You too. Did you make a